The Italian Open press room had seen a lot of things. Champions crying, upsets being dissected, legends announcing their final seasons. But on May 11th, 2026, nobody in that room, not a single journalist, not a single camera operator, not a single person watching the live feed from thousands of miles away was prepared for what Alex Eala was about to say. The 20-year-old Filipina had just walked off the court after one of the most competitive matches of her clay season. She sat down behind the microphone, calm as ever, composed as ever, and the world expected nothing unusual. And then she leaned forward, and everything changed. Let's go back to where this story really begins, because to understand why that press room fell silent, you have to understand what Alex Eala had just done on that court. The match was a third-round showdown at the Foro Italico in Rome, one of the most iconic clay courts in the world. Her opponent was no ordinary player. It was Elena Rybakina, world number 2, the reigning Australian Open champion, one of the most powerful and technically dominant players in women's tennis right now. On paper, this was supposed to be a straightforward win for Rybakina, a dangerous but manageable obstacle, a third-round match she would take care of before moving deeper into the tournament. Nobody told Eala that. The scoreline at the end read 6-4, 6-3 in Rybakina's favor, but scorelines don't always tell the full story, and this one absolutely does not. Eala pushed Rybakina to 28 winners. She broke her serve. She held her own against one of the biggest serves and heaviest forehands in the game. She made the world number 2 work for every single point. For a 20-year-old ranked outside the top 35, facing a Grand Slam champion, that performance was nothing short of extraordinary. The Philippine flags that had packed the Foro Italico were waving. The chants of Laban Alex, the Filipino rallying cry that translates to Fight Alex, echoed off the marble statues surrounding the stadium. It was the kind of scene that makes tennis fans fall in love with the sport all over again. And then the match ended, and Eala walked into the press room. And everything that happened next is the reason we're all here today. Rome, Italy, May 11th, 2026. The Foro Italico Media Center. Remember that date, because what unfolded in that room is something the tennis world will not forget for a very long time. The press conference started exactly the way you'd expect it to start. Eala sat behind the microphone, her face carrying the quiet, calm exhaustion of an athlete who had just spent 2 hours battling one of the best players on the planet. The journalists had their notebooks ready, their cameras rolling, their questions prepared. They wanted to talk about the match, about her growth on clay, about her plans for the French Open coming up at the end of May. Standard stuff, routine press conference energy. And for a while, that's exactly what they got. Eala answered with the honesty and grace that has always defined how she carries herself in public. "I think I was able to reach a good level of tennis," she said. "I don't think it was an easy win for her." She talked about her movement on clay, how much it had improved since the same tournament a year ago, how the work she and her team had put in behind the scenes was finally showing up in real results. She smiled when a journalist mentioned the Philippine flags in the stands, the fans who had traveled from across Europe just to see her play. "I'm very happy with this week," she said, "because I do see the improvement on clay court, especially when you compare it to my experience here last year." The journalists nodded, the cameras rolled. The room had the settled, almost sleepy rhythm of a press conference winding down. People were starting to close their notebooks. And then Alex Eala leaned into the microphone, and she said 4 words that stopped everything. "I have an announcement to make." The room didn't just go quiet, it went still. The kind of still where you can suddenly hear things you couldn't hear before. The hum of the air conditioning, the distant sound of footsteps in the corridor outside. Journalists who had been halfway to closing their laptops froze mid-motion. Camera operators who had been mentally preparing to wrap up instinctively zoomed in. And in the stands outside, where fans were still buzzing from the match, the Philippine flags, those bright, proud flags that had been waving all afternoon, stopped moving. Nobody breathed, and Eala spoke. "I've decided to take a step back," she said, "not from tennis, from everything else." The journalists looked at each other. Nobody had a question ready for this. Nobody had seen this coming. This was not a tennis answer. This was something entirely different, and it was only just beginning. Here is the part of the story that will stay with you, because what Alex Eala said next wasn't about rankings or results. It wasn't about tactics or tournament schedules. It was about something far more human than any of that. She began to speak about her life, not her career, her life. "I've been playing tennis since I was 4 years old," she said, her voice steady but carrying an emotion that everyone in that room recognized immediately as something real, something unguarded. "I've been on the road since I was 13 years old. Let that land for a second. 13 years old. Most of us at 13 are figuring out high school hallways and weekend plans. Alex Eala at 13 was boarding international flights, competing in junior tournaments, sleeping in unfamiliar cities, building herself into the player that would one day push the world #2 to the limit at the Foro Italico. I've missed birthdays," she continued. "I've missed holidays. I've missed moments that I will never get back." And then she said something that made it clear she hadn't been bottling this up for days. She'd been bottling it up for years. "And I've been okay with that," she said, "because I love this sport, because I love representing the Philippines, because I love all of you who wave flags and chant my name." Her eyes drifted upward, the way they do when someone is searching for words that don't come easily, words that are true enough to say out loud. "But lately," she said, "I've been asking myself a question that I've been afraid to answer." The press room, already silent, somehow became even more so. Every single person in that room understood they were no longer at a tennis press conference. They were watching a 20-year-old human being speak an honest truth out loud, possibly for the first time. And then she asked the question, "What am I playing for?" 3 words, 6 syllables, and the weight of them hit the room like a physical thing. Notebooks stayed closed. Pens stayed still. The cameras kept rolling because the camera operators were professionals, but you could feel it. Even behind the lenses, people were listening differently now. "I've been asking myself this question a lot lately," Eala continued. "Not about the rankings, not about the trophies, about something deeper." She paused, and in that pause you could feel everyone in the room leaning slightly forward without realizing it. "I started playing tennis because I loved it, because it made me feel alive, because every time I stepped on the court, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be." Her voice cracked, just slightly, just for a moment, but everyone heard it. "But somewhere along the way, I started playing for other reasons, for the ranking, for the expectations, for the millions of people who were watching." She looked down at her hands. "And I lost something I didn't even know I was losing." If there was any doubt before that moment about whether this press conference was historic, that doubt evaporated right there, because Alex Eala, the 20-year-old who had faced world #2 Elena Rybakina without flinching, who had saved break points against top 10 opponents, who had carried the hopes and pride of 110 million Filipinos on her shoulders without ever complaining, had just let her guard down in front of the entire world. And what came next was the announcement that sent shockwaves through every corner of the tennis universe. "I've decided to take a break," she said. Gasps. Actual, audible gasps. In a professional press room full of seasoned journalists who cover this sport for a living, there were genuine gasps. "Not from tennis," she clarified, pausing for just a beat. "From the pressure." And then she said it plainly, without drama, without softening it. "I'm going to skip the French Open.
The journalists exchanged stunned glances, because you have to understand what the French Open means. Roland Garros is the second Grand Slam of the tennis season. It is the clay court cathedral. It is the tournament that every single player who grinds through the clay swing, through Monte Carlo and Madrid and Rome, is ultimately building toward. The red dirt of Paris is where legends are made. It is where Rafael Nadal built his dynasty. It is where clay court specialists spend their entire offseason engineering their games. And Alex Eala, who had just had the best clay season of her career, who had climbed the rankings, who had the Philippine flags filling the stands and the momentum of the tennis world watching her rise, was voluntarily walking away from it. Not because of injury, not because of illness, because she needed to remember who she was. My body needs rest, she said. My mind needs rest, and I need to remember why I started playing this sport in the first place. She looked directly at the camera, not at the journalists, directly at the camera, directly at the millions of people watching around the world. I'm not retiring. I'm not quitting. I'm just pausing, so that when I come back stronger. The press conference ended a few minutes later. The cameras stopped rolling inside that room. But outside, on every screen, every phone, every social media platform on Earth, something enormous had just been set in motion.
Within minutes, not hours, minutes, the news had exploded across the internet. The hashtag #AlexBreak was trending worldwide before the press conference footage had even finished uploading. Fans from the Philippines, from Europe, from across the Americas flooded every platform with reactions that ranged from shock to admiration to tearful support. "She's skipping the French Open," one fan wrote. "The tournament she's been building toward all clay season. This is huge. I respect her so much for this." Mental health matters. Rest matters. She's putting herself first. The pressure of carrying a nation is real. If she needs a break, she deserves a break. Full stop. Philippine media ran headlines that captured exactly what this moment meant for a nation that had watched Eala grow from a junior prodigy into a legitimate WTA force. Alex Eala prioritizes mental health, skips the French Open, read one front page. A champion's wisdom. Eala chooses rest over glory, read another. Tennis journalists offered more measured but no less significant takes. This is unprecedented for a player ranked number 38 who just had her best clay season, wrote one prominent columnist. But Eala has always done things her own way. Why should this be any different? And then the fellow athletes weighed in, and that's when the moment went from big to genuinely historic. Coco Gauff, herself a young star who has spoken openly about the psychological weight of professional tennis, posted simply, "Proud of you for putting yourself first. The court will be waiting when you're ready." Naomi Osaka, who has been one of the most important voices in professional sports when it comes to mental health, added 4 words that said everything. "This takes courage. So much courage." She's setting an example for every young athlete out there. When Naomi Osaka says it takes courage, the tennis world listens. And the tennis world was listening very, very closely. But here's the thing, and this is the part of the story that the headlines don't fully capture. Alex Eala wasn't finished. Even in the moment of making an announcement that shocked an entire sport, she was thinking about her fans. She was thinking about the people in the Philippines who had woken up at odd hours to watch her matches live. She was thinking about the fans who had already booked their flights to Paris, who had planned their schedules around watching her compete at Roland Garros. And in the final moments of that press conference, she spoke directly to them. "I know some of you will be disappointed," she said, her voice steady despite everything. "I know some of you traveled to Paris expecting to see me play, and I'm sorry. I'm truly sorry." Her eyes glistened under the press room lights. "But I promise you this, when I come back, I will be better, not just as a player, as a person, as a daughter, as a representative of our country." She looked into the camera one final time.
The Philippine flags will fly again. The chants of Laban Alex will echo again. But first, I need to heal. I need to rest. I need to remember why I fell in love with this sport in the first place. The room held its silence. These were journalists who had sat through hundreds of press conferences, people professionally trained to stay neutral, to observe, to report. And in that moment, every single one of them was moved. "This is not goodbye," Eala said, her voice quiet but certain. "This is see you later." She stood up, she nodded to the room, and she walked out. Now let's talk about what this moment actually means, because it means more than just one player skipping one tournament. The tennis world has seen this story before, and it has not always ended well. The sport has a long and painful history of young stars who burned incredibly bright and then burned out. Prodigies who arrived at 17 ranked inside the top 50 and were gone from the sport by 23, consumed by the relentless pressure of expectations they were never given time to process. Players who won their first Grand Slam before they were old enough to vote and spent the next decade chasing that feeling in increasingly desperate ways. Women's tennis especially has watched this cycle repeat itself.
Generations, the emergence, the explosion, the weight, the collapse. And it has not always intervened in time to prevent the damage. What Alexandra Eala did in that press room was choose a different story. She looked at the trajectory she was on, ranked 38th in the world, climbing, carrying a nation, building toward what could genuinely be one of the great careers in Filipino sports history. And she said, "Not like this. Not at the cost of who I am. Not at the cost of why I started." She chose rest over glory. She chose herself over the rankings. She chose the long career, the sustainable career, the career that will still be burning bright a decade from now over the short flame that lights up everything and then disappears. And the fact that she did it publicly, in a press conference, on camera, in front of the world, that matters. Because every young athlete watching that footage understands something now that might take years to learn any other way. That stepping back is not the same as giving up. That choosing your mind is not weakness. That the greatest champions are not the ones who never stop. They are the ones who know when to pause. Let's also take a moment to talk about what she accomplished at this tournament before any of this happened, because it deserves to be said clearly. At the Italian Open, Alexandra Eala defeated world number 45 Magdalena Frech. She defeated the 31st seed Wang Xinyu. She pushed world number 2 Elena Rybakina, the player who had just won the Australian Open, to a genuinely competitive third-round match that Rybakina herself acknowledged was not easy. Eala's ranking moved from 42 to 38 during the tournament. She earned €79,510 in prize money. She had the best clay season of her professional career. And then, at the peak of that momentum, she chose health. She chose wholeness. She chose herself. In a sport, in a world that constantly tells athletes that stopping is failure, that rest is weakness, that you must always be moving forward or you are falling behind, Alexandra Eala looked that narrative in the eye and walked away from it. Not in anger, not in defeat. With grace, with clarity, with the quiet, unshakable confidence of someone who knows exactly who they are and exactly what they need.
So here is where we land. The French Open will begin without Alexandra Eala. Roland Garros will not have the Philippine flags in the stands. The chants of Laban Alex will not echo through the Parisian clay. And for a few weeks, the tennis world will move forward without one of its most exciting young voices. But she made a promise, and if there is one thing the last few years of watching Alexandra Eala compete have made clear, it is this. When she makes a promise, she keeps it. She promised she would get better on clay. She did. She promised she would compete with the best in the world. She did. And now she has promised that when she comes back, she will come back as something more than the player who left. Not just higher ranked, not just stronger physically, more grounded, more whole, more herself. The tennis world has seen players return from breaks before. Sometimes they come back diminished.
Sometimes they come back exactly the same. And sometimes, just sometimes, they come back transformed into something that nobody saw coming. The question that everyone is now asking, fans, journalists, fellow players, the 110 million Filipinos who have been watching every match, every tournament, every chant and flag and late-night live stream, is a simple one. When Alex Eala walks back onto a tennis court, will she be the same player who made Rome stop and stare, or will she be something even greater? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this story is far from over. And when she comes back, and she will come back, we will all be watching.